Promove edição especial virtual. Realização e promoção. Patrocínio. Apoio. Apoio institucional. Parceria. Parceiros de mídia. Assessoria de imprensa. A logística e a transformação digital integrando negócios.
Hello. Those of you that are watching us, welcome. Here, live from Expolog 2020 studios, we send you a virtual greeting. Our entire audience in Ceará, Brazil, and the rest of the world, watching the International Logistics Seminar in this very special edition, 15 years, the main theme, Logistics and Digital Transformation, Integrating Business. Let us watch now Panel 1, National Ports, Advantages and Challenges with New Public Policies for Public Ports, the Law from 2020. So let's check it out.
Hello everyone. We are here in our first panel to advantages, disadvantages, and challenges for the new public policy for public ports, Law 14047, 24 of August of 2020, my birthday date. Well, we have here the Secretary Diogo Piloni, Ted Lago, representing the Port of Itaqui, Mr. Murillo of ATP, Jesualdo from ABTP, and Mario Povia representing CDRJ. So I wish you a nice event. Please, Mr. Secretary Diogo Piloni, the floor is yours. Thank you for your presentation. Well, I am the one who will say thanks and, to be here with you, very important representatives, Mr. Jesualdo, Mr. Murillo, Mayhara, Dr. Mayhara, President of the companies associations, company port associations, and Ted Lago, our partner, representing so well this generation, this fantastic generation of port managers managing our organized ports. Also, Dr. Mario as well, management and now regulator, changing a great change of roles. So, and it's a pleasure to be here talking about innovation from the public policies. It's a discussion that we've had the opportunity to conduct together with the Congress, together with the market representatives, the conclusion of the temporary law and a report of our Congressman Francisquini and also the Senator Fagundes in our Brazilian Senate. So, we are very happy with this new step, with new achievements for all the port sector in Brazil. So this this provisional measure or temporary measure had the intention to deal with the pandemic, that demanded us urgent measures. So through these provisional measure, and when these measures have been brought, and we've achieved to mitigate the impacts from the pandemic, and bottom line, we've kept our port operations working well without interruptions. We've had some threats in the beginning of the pandemic, but also with the preservation of the necessary cares. So mostly with the workers, the dock workers, or touristic cruisers, and with this touristic cruises and with this non-logistics interruption, we can also celebrate good results with increasing operations despite the crisis. And all over Brazil, it's been a reality. We have statistics until August or September by our regulator, ANTAC. So we've had 4% of increase in general in Brazil. We've had some segments more or less affected. We've had a nice harvest in terms of agriculture. We've had and so good results in port operations. But even with some sectors, for example, the liquid cargo that we assumed to have more impacts, we've had increase indeed. Maybe in amongst the sectors more affected for the crisis, we've had some scenarios with a lot of maintenance, but obviously it's not been a general rule. We've had ports with a great increase of operations. For example, Itajaí in the south of Brazil, it's a port with a great purpose to operate with containers. We've had a great increase of operations in Paranaguá as well, in the state of Paraná. And even in the scenario of containers operations, movement, import, in theory, it's been more affected during the crisis, but these ports, they've had increase in cargo, importing cargo. So Brazil has shown its resilience to the world, but besides the dealing with the urgent sanitary problems, we've had the opportunity that in the convention of the provisional measure, we've brought important solutions to give the port managers, tools to have more management flexibility, more agility with the logistics issues. And some of these instruments brought by this 14047, the number of the law. So the waiving of bidding, for example, for cases when we have only one interested party to operate some area. I think this is very common. And till this provisional measure launching brought by the law, we know that since the beginning, when we know there is only one interested before this law, even with only one interested party, we've had to take all the bidding process, and this new law brought this improvement, mostly for the vertical chains, when we have a producer demanding, when we have only one provider in a chain. And in this case, it makes sense that this producer, this operator, to verticalize the port operations. And on the other hand, when we have an operator and intermediary, in the middle of this chain, we have some risks. We have risks of extra fees, extra charges. So in a chain that is have a purpose to be vertical. So we bring agility to the agreements. We can waive the bidding processes. Sometimes we earn 1 year in terms of time. And so because, we know cargo doesn't expect us. So we need to find alternatives, but sometimes the best alternative is the alternative to deal with the operation inside the port. So we need to address quickly all the demands. So the second point brought by this 14047 law is the possibility of the agreements of temporary usage by our managements in our organized ports. It's not a novelty in terms of norms. We've had this alternative brought by a resolution of our regulator to celebrate agreements, temporary agreements to non-consolidated cargo, so cargo not regular cargo. So we've had this resolution. This resolution had been established. So we've had 2 dozens, more or less, of temporary contracts in Brazil. But we've had a step back in this process with a judicial claim and the federal justice of the state of Espírito Santo questioning the validity of this instrument with alleged non-legal fundament. And with this new 14047, we bring legal fundament, legal basis for these temporary contracts. So it's another tool for the port manager to make new dynamics, to attract new cargo, and to give a quick answer to chains that sometimes demand from the port interested in. So if we have interest from the private initiative, we have interest from the managers, but the answer comes with an answer. The demand is answered with the tenant process or bidding processes. And now we have this simplified selection process with a previously established term with a maximum term of 48 months, but allows these chains, these entrepreneurs to have a first experience, to assess if this flow of goods is an activity that will be feasible, viable, from this depart to a long-term contract, the traditional tenancy for 35 years or 70 years, as we have in the decree 9048 in validity. So the law, this new 14047, established also something that is already habitual. It's the guideline of free prices, the freedom of prices to port activity. So inside the organized ports or with the private terminals, so bringing a legal security for the entrepreneurs, investors that are trusting in Brazil, interested to invest in Brazil, but they want to have the proper return with their investment. So we need to have these very well established, and cemented within the law, and this is now with one of the guidelines of the practice of the freedom of price, only with the possibility to the regulator to interfere when abuses are detected. So this is ex post regulation practice. We have freedom of price, and only with signs of abuses the regulator can interfere. So this is legally established. So we have discussions from the defense of competitiveness entities, advocacy. And our understanding is to this concept to be strengthened and to have the proper credibility to Brazil, in order to Brazil have this proper credibility, so with legal security. So we have more than 200 tenancy contracts in Brazil, and these entrepreneurs are celebrating these agreements and considering this logic of regulation. The regulation must be secured, so we can't change the rules in the middle of the game. Another concept with this 14047, and when we discuss the organization of the organized ports, is the possibility of the lessees, for example, concessionaire lessees, to in order to this concessionaires to have the law, the port law. Proper port law guidelines to deal with the port operators. We are advanced with the studies of de-statization. We have the first pilot. We have ports. We have the project pilots with the ports of the state of Espírito Santo, 4 ports in that state. And so this provisional measure arrive in a timely manner, because to give even more legal security. So something we've had in the decree, in the previous decree 9048, but it's even more secured when we have this in our legal framework. So we have a history of ports awarded or conceded to the private sector in the past, but we are presenting new models of this, and we'll have our first case with Codesa, CODESA, the company that has been it has a concession to operate a public port. We know that in our operators, our representatives of the associations, putting together our private operators in ABTP, for example. We have operations in all segments. We have in containers, in bulk. We have efficiency comparable or even superior than operations in other ports, in other references around the world. But we have a challenge to bring this efficiency from the private sector also to our organized port administration or management. We have a moment now when we are celebrating excellent managements. We have here at least 3 managers present, Mayhara, Ted, and Mario. So people like these, so we can, in people like these, we can trust to be good managers. They are presenting good results, but in fact, in our port activity, the asset management that must have a purpose with stability, with regularity. Sometimes this good moment of management may be altered by a decision, sometimes that lacks of good of common sense from the governors, from the executive decision makers, and whatever instance or jurisdictions. And the de-statization so aims to bring more regularity, more stability, because we'll have a long-term agreement with goals, with indicators, and we can consider Brazil nowadays with a culture of respect to agreements, and I think we can consider the de-statization. And with de-statization, we'll address the lack of regularity that we have with the state management from any government possible. And I'm not here punishing the political referrals to some executive positions. But sometimes these recommendations from politicians, sometimes they're very bad because we need people who know their activity. We need managers that understand, experienced managers in the field. And now we're talking about governance, and we have the possibility to bring more private investments that in a moment of fiscal difficulties, it's critical. So we need these investments to infrastructure improvements, to new accesses, more better conditions for docking. So this public authority in the ports nowadays, so the investments in assets of common use in this complex. So we may bring the private initiative for this game with their investments. I think that will be very interesting. And as I said, we are advancing with this model, with the CODESA, C-O-D-E-S-A, our pilot. So we are interested to open this public consultation to have the contribution of the various players, so the ship owners, the dock workers, all these stakeholders, this complex community that is the port community. And may we build a model to serve as an example, as a legacy for the next ones in the future. So we can't standardize the solutions for all the ports. For example, we have Port of Santos and Port and the CODESA. They are different, but I hope to have some answers in the public consultation in the next months. So with this, I close my speech, and with the de-statization, we bring a solution for one of our problems, so that is to be free of the model of the state management. It doesn't mean that we don't want the state management to be improved, and we have lots of legal institutes bringing to the public management important tools. We'll try to improve, to enhance from the norm point of view or for the legal point of view with new ordinances or decrees. And after the approval of the 14047 law, we are trying already to establish the decree, the regulatory decree for this 14047 law. and with the broadened discussion from the sector and with the active participation of the central government, treasury, auditing, and that brought opportunities of improvement for the organized ports and flexibilizing the current agreements, not only improvements to flexibilize new contracts, but also to deal the existing agreements and contracts with new claims for investments of our lessees, and to have more investments, big investments in the current contracts. So we have this continuous review to deal with contracts. We can see that as much flexible, as much open, as less the public power intervenes in the activity in our private partners. The result and the point of view of the public interest it's more achieved, it's more positively impacted. So I think this is our energy. So we brought lots of interesting things to the sector, but we have a lot to do, and I reiterate my gratitude to be here, and I thank you all for this opportunity. So thank you, Mr. Secretary Diogo Piloni, for your nice explanation of the 14047 law. We've evolved in the last few years. We had recently lots of discussions about these themes, and each day more we are seeing the commitment of the Ports Secretariat, the commitment of the Ministry of Infrastructure, improving each day more our public ports, each day more bringing private investments into the public ports, improving our managements, improving our infrastructure. And I'm sure as the president of the ECDC or president of ABEP, we can see a great future, great horizon. But I don't want to answer the questions of my speakers here. So we have Ted here, Mario, and we are about to create a mix of questions. And starting with Jesualdo, what is the vision of the private market in front of all these changings that Diogo presented us in the law 14047? So thank you very much, Mayhara, our president. So it's a pleasure to be here on behalf of ABTP, participating of this very important forum at Expolog in its 15th edition in this digital format. So it's a pleasure for us to have we have 68 associates, and these companies, they are lessees, and they have the concession of more than 100 terminals all over Brazil. I greet here our Secretary Diogo Piloni, a true warrior for our sector. He's doing a lot of good things to our sector. He's our quarterback. You know, he's quite a minister, you know, and always conversing. Our sector has been as having a lot of ears from the government, and it's so this dialogue, these conversations are so very important to our sector. So I congratulate also our president of ABEP, President Mayhara, and Mayhara Chaves. She's bringing another vision. She's improving our reputation. And so ABTP has we've had the opportunity to dialogue about these themes. I congratulate Mr. Ted Lago from the port of Itaqui. So, and by the way, this Ministry of Agriculture has myriad, so it's a group of pop stars, and it's making a lot of good to our sector. And also I congratulate Mr. Mario Povia and also Mr. Murillo, Admiral Murillo. We are always together to defend our sector. In fact, so Mr. Secretary Piloni summarized in a great way all the achievements of the 14047. In terms of structuration, it approaches the initial part, so the agility to make available areas and port installations for the business operations. And he mentioned the main points. And so the waiving of the bidding processes are very, very complex. When sometimes we've had only one interested party, and the processes was required the same. So, and it's very important to test some executive positions. So it's a tool, it's a very important tool to the port framework, but most of all to us in the private sector. So it's like a startup. We can see it if it works, and then we can continue. So in other parts of the Secretary's speech, he also bring us new information, so the things yet to come. So another very important legal institute is the simplified tenancy. We saw this, it already existed, but now it's more consolidated. So we start to use in Brazil the so-called flat rate, and it may be extended afterwards. We hope it occurs to all kinds of the tenancies, not only those temporary with 10 years and 300 million investment threshold. So what we need in the private sector, that we are always saying, it's economic freedom. It's been very well stated by the Secretary. So the economic freedom, it's about the freedom of investment, freedom of prices, and freedom of agreements or contracting. In the 14047, in the third article of the guidelines, so we have the freedom of price, we have to search for the freedom of price with legal security. And Mr. Secretary told us that any regulation for this to be more established is valid, and it's to be exposed, to be not to do any methodologies, any previously established methodologies, and to be applied in any price increase. So we have a risk to this, to have a price table someday. So the regulation must occur only in some punctual situations with when we have claims, when we have abuses. So this guideline, however, inherent to the sector. So this we have the competition inside the terminals, inside the organized ports, and between these organized and the terminals, private terminals, we have this healthy competitiveness, and in this case, the practice of prices. So these prices must be free, because the market is establishing the prices. So the market was already regulating this, but the 14047 recognizes this with an article, I think it's the item number 6 of the third article. So it's very important to have this in our legal framework. And what do we expect with the regulation? So to advance a little bit more in the freedom of investment, mostly to the contracts that are already running. So we have lots of investments to attend the needs of the business. We need in a more agile way, and I can mention some Dr. Flavia Lavor and they've been trying to improve the processes, even if we have more agility nowadays, but we need to advance even more because we have lots of investment to do. We are not worried to revert this to the government because we know that they'll be amortized, but we need quick authorization. So and we can't afford for this extreme and huge bureaucracy. And we see that the Secretariat is already working in this sense, and most of all, the matter of reversibility, because we have some authorization issues and all that technical analysis from ANTAC. It's about reversibility, and we know that you, Mr. Piloni, and Mrs. Mayhara, by the end of the tenancies, this reversibility, most of all with the movable properties, is one huge issue for the sector. And another expectation from the sector is in the sense of more flexibility and the current contracts. And in this 14047, we had kind of a lean up on the clauses, essential clauses, and productivity metrics. It's kind of being repetitive to impose to the private sector productivity, because the private sector is always searching for good productivity. And it could be, we risk to have this as a mechanism of regulation, so working as a incentive on the contrary. So now it's not possible to talk about too much, but we need to elaborate the port sector. Part of this has been addressed in our 1407. I don't call the 1407 a small reform, because it changed a lot in very important points, but in the labor question changed two very important points. One of these is been to implement definitively the electronic lineup. I'll not enter in details, but it means more productivity. Another important aspect, it's been the multiplicity of the functions. You can use temporary workers, sporadic workers, or block workers, or dock workers, or even maintenance, if this worker has a specific training. So the waiving of new registration processes. But we need to give another step, that is exclusivity of contraction, of exclusivity of hiring. So, but this is a question to discuss. We'll have next moment to discuss all of this. And finishing my speech, I would like to say that the success of this 14047 has been the intense conversation carried out by the government, by Mr. Secretary Piloni. So lots of times we've been together with the labor unions, with the private sector association. So then we've understood that this law, in the first moment, the provisional measure had in the first moment to address the sanitary issues of the pandemic. We, as entrepreneurs, we took all the necessary measures, and we've been partners, and also we've sat with the labor union, labor federations, and we all together, under the umbrella of our Mr. Secretary Piloni, we arrived to a very good resolution. So I thank you, Mayhara, and I pass the floor to you. Thank you. So we thank you for your brilliant contribution. And so going deeper in this private matter, I'll call in Admiral Murillo Barbosa from ATP, and I would like to tease you with a question about this de-statization process. How ATP sees the de-statization processes conducted by the Ministry of Infrastructure, this how it works, how do you think it works? Do you agree with Mr. Secretary Diogo Piloni with this process of privatization? So, Mr. Secretary Piloni, Mr. Jesualdo, President Mayhara, Ted Lago, Mario, a special greetings for our mediator Mayhara. She's bringing new dynamics. So raising up the ABEP is a very important association for our sector. I'm sure that Mr. Secretary Piloni is a witness of this, that one of the associations, the more enthusiastic association has been ATP. We always been favorable to the privatization or de-statization processes. And the most important thing we've said is that we need to develop the port sector as a whole. We cannot work segmented. We need to see the benefits that all this bring to Brazil. And some time ago, we had Piloni together with us. We've been discussing these processes with Julio from Codesa, and sometimes Julio said, yes, company X on the entrance of the port of Victoria had been a cargo stolen, or between commas, inside of the port of Victoria. But Julio, it's been bad to the port, but it's been good to the country. I think that's the vision we must have. This whole process of de-statization, it's very important, and it's because ATP has been always defended this process, and I think we are attacking the weakest point of this. That is the concessionaires, about our concessions. I think there is our biggest issue, and ATP has a great interest on this, because I don't know if you have this clearly. More than 50% of the private use terminals, they use the infrastructure of a port, organized port. So more than 50%. So all the problems, all the difficulties that an organized port has to manage, it affects the lessee, but always the peripheral areas, because it makes part of the same structure. So for us, it's very important that those one who have the concession of the port, the Brazilian authorities, they have extremely flexible rules to perform the management in the best way possible. All of us, we've had opportunity to visit ports in Europe. I'm very sorry about an episode that happened to me in a Ghent port, in the port of Ghent. It's a small port compared to Antwerp, for example, with some peculiarities. And we performed a visit there in a mission of ANTAC, the regulator, and the representative there, the manager there, got us to a boat trip. And I've been surprised with totally ready for use dock. And I asked him, what's that? Oh, it's for the Brazilians. And how's the bidding processes? No, there are no bidding processes. You come here, we sit on the table and we exchange ideas, and if we arrive into an agreement, so we sign a leasing contract. So I was surprised. I was looking had a quite dummy face, and he said, "Do you see that company there? If tomorrow they arrive and ask for another space here, and if I think that's interesting from our port, I can change that lessee. I can exchange the lessee's places. I can exchange places, simply like that. So we can interfere or control the political referrals to occupy public executive job posts, but so we can change all these instruments. We can reduce a little bit the interference of the enforcement public bodies or the regulators, but the Brazilian culture will be always like that. We can't imagine, and I think you all agree, that if tomorrow Mayhara will have a meeting and ABTP that will try to use a fishing terminal that is not occupied, and Mayhara arrive into an agreement, and I'm sure that it would be on the newspapers, and on the news, saying that Mayhara is making some illegal actions. And I think all these things in the direction of the de-estatization or privatization are very important to the port sector, looking at the bigger picture. So there's another aspect that bothers a lot. That is some pestilent, I may say, saying. So the competitiveness asymmetry. So there is no competitiveness asymmetry between the tenant and the lessee, and but it makes difficult for the tenant, either for the tenant and either for the lessee, and I think this is this temporary contract instrument are very important, brought by this 14047. I remember we tried to establish it some years ago, and we've been retaliated by everyone, and it's a very important instrument. And I think it could be even bolder to use in another situations. And we may concede a specific area for 4 years. Why not? Even if we have some tenancy in the port, and maybe the interested may not submit to the rules of that tenancy because they will need for 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years. That's the case of our offshore support. And I think it could be a more open instrument. And so the waiving of bidding process, with no doubt, we are about to make new propositions, and the public biddings must end. We need to reduce the red tape. So to end the bidding process is when we have only one party interested in a vertical chain. It's extremely important. So in the private law, talking about private law, it's maybe it's been an anticipation of a process by this alteration, talking about private law and the private authority. I think the biggest changing was about the freedom of price, but because since the law 10233 has never been obeyed by the regulator, so the untaxed regulator understand that the upper threshold is not regulation of price. The regulator understand that the pricing regulation does not bothers the freedom of price, and I'm very afraid of this practical applicability because we already have a resolution from ANTAC that states that the methodology, this model has been identified for the deliverance. It's written in a very clear way that it may be applied to another services in a terminal. It's extremely concerning. So we are walking into control of prices. So, and I'm afraid that this obligation of the law is not being followed in a very clear way, following guidelines by the ministry in charge. And I will tell clearly what we have from this. I'm sure that ANTAC will act strongly in these instruments, saying that they're defending a possible abuse. And we don't understand this like that. And I'm very worried if this freedom of price does not produce the effect we tried to achieve. So this is a thing that Secretariat and the Ministry can turn into a dead writing. Well, as the first approach of these presentations and of our secretary, it's something like that. So the ATP supports any process that brings to port management instruments of improvement, and if it contributes to our most important instrument of economic development, that is trade, foreign trade through our commodities. So what saved us in this pandemic period was exactly the efficiency of our commodities and our port terminals acting in a very decisive way. So our contributions would be in this sense. As Diogo told us initially, in the national scenario, more than 4 and 5% of our cargo movements. So excellent your contributions when you comment to our reality international experiences. I think it enriches a lot our discussion. And to give a little bit of de-statization theme, I would ask Ted Lago to comment. So what's your vision on de-statization or privatization to modernize the port sector in Brazil? Hello everyone, President Mayhara, so my colleagues, Jesualdo, and especially our Secretary. So before answering this question, I would like to give you a testimonial about matters of ports and this year we are living. We're been talking about the results, celebrate the results, and Brazil awarding lots of results. But this year has been very difficult. We are here today. I'd like to give this testimonial because we are here thanks to you, Mr. Secretary, because we've had a very, very tough days, and thanks to your openness, thanks to your articulation. I don't know if you remember, the ports were threatening to stop the operations, but thanks to your team, thanks to your good articulation with the other public bodies, helped us to keep our ports open. So we've had a lot of misinformation by the end of March and April. And we've had tough days and tough nights. And surely we have an uncertainty, around 200,000 people lost their lives, but it could be worse if we hadn't this relationship with trust. So, and about the question, my vision as a port management about the privatization. I come from the private initiative. I have 6 years in the port, but I come from the private initiative, other activities. I've had lots of prejudice on public companies. I've been reluctant when the Governor Flávio Dino asked me to be here, but I accepted the challenge. So I will take all my experience of private initiative to the public company. And with time, I started to understand the role of the public port. So we've assembled, I've set up a nice team. I've had autonomy from the governor to do this, and we've achieved to revert some negative results. It's a reality on the majority of the ports in Brazil, to the EBITDA growth and the turnaround in the management. And with time, I've achieved to understand the role and the strategy of the public power. Because here, we more than transform Itaqui in a private port, you need to bring management principles, and you need to bring governance. And I see the main point in this debate is the quality of the management for results. You need to be profitable, you need to give support to your investments, regardless of the model, if it's public or private. On the other hand, we've been talking about it, and the Ministry of Infrastructure and the Port Secretariat, they've been very successful in giving us lots of options. So, and in some cases, open of capital, we have lots of options to adaptation. So if you look around, I've been asked a lot about this. So the private sector is already into the public ports, so in our daily activity. And about our law evolution is to facilitate, to bring more investments and to make possible these private investments to arrive in a more timely manner. And I see there are some limits. Sometimes I joke around that my toolbox of management is limited. I've done whatever. I've done everything possible. For example, bidding processes. So in the best scenario, you can contract in 6 months, 8 months. In the more complex work, you have 8 months or 1 year of bidding processes. So we need to have the possibility to manage all the gains we're having in the public sector. But on the other hand, we are operating with cargo from 7 Brazilian states, and we've been experiencing lots of advancement in education and health, the professional education, but we've been affected obviously by the pandemic. So we search for investments, thinking about the region, thinking of boosting new cargo. 2 years ago, we built a warehouse to container when we haven't had any container cargo movement. But now this new warehouse has been fundamental for the supply chain of the whole region. And sometimes I see my colleagues talking about hundreds of thousands of TEUs. We are with around 1.5 thousand TEUs, but so we need to think about investments, not thinking only in port results, but the results for the region. So, because what I defend, it's a modernization of this state model. Let's observe the pilot of Codisa or an Itajaí model, so, and trying to evolve towards this. But we need some efficient public entity to plan correctly, to establish this strategic plan to develop all the region in the surroundings of the port, mostly in the northeastern Brazil. We have great industrial projects, agribusiness, and we operate with ogives, a very special cargo. Don't have, for example, these ogives, they do not bring interesting results, but we need to take all the measures necessary for this cargo to develop our region. So we have different characteristics amongst all the ports, but which can be a model to a port, to a region under development, a region with lots of fronts. We need always a mediator, maybe a local mediator that understands the local reality, interacting with the conceding power and interacting with the regulator to help the regions to plan in a gathered way the port development. I'm open to your opinions, but I think it's a moment to evolve in the port management in Brazil. Thank you, Ted Lago. Excellent insights. The role of the public ports in the pandemic moment. Maybe it's not the best option, as you said, the warehouse for containers or terminal for containers. Maybe it's not the best, the more profitable structure for a port, but it's important for the region. So the public ports are for this, to the development of the surroundings, besides serve the international trade. And so its role of social developer, bringing the port sector close to the society and contributing to the well-being of the population and the surroundings. So now I have a question to Mr. Mario Povia. It's very nice to be here with you. I wish you once more, I welcome you to your new charge, to your new job post in the dock company of Rio de Janeiro. Welcome again to the port sector, and which are the main points of importance of this 14047 law, new law?
Right. Regarding this law, it's important to say that in what scenario this comes up, it really has a lot to do with the pandemic, this critical situation, which is to maintain ports up and running during a pandemic, so that we would not paralyze services. And the Ministry of Infrastructure and the different measures that have been taken, including the possibility of stopping activities or even strikes. But we've taken some measures, and one of the measures to declare that this is an essential activity. Since the creation of the Port Secretariat, this condition has been given to ports. Ports are essential services, and this has been ratified with this new legislation as essential work. And it couldn't be different during the pandemic situation, but it was very immediate. It was a quick response, if you will, right in the beginning of the pandemic. Another issue is regarding outsourced labor. It's a relevant number of workers that are in risk, but they haven't had their remuneration interrupted. This was all regulated, and actually the source of resources in order to deal with these payments, this was also very well done and quickly done in order not to leave any questions or doubts, in such a way that everything was done regularly. In other words, the work continued, services continued non-stop. It's also important to mention some administrative measures, such as the hiring of outsourced labor. The government took on such a measure. But of course, I need to comment on some other issues, structuring issues that end up taking place in terms of this law. And so I'd like to address the main points without going into too much detail in order for us to have a greater debate, but private nature from the concession of ports and the leasing contracts that are widely used in the private sector. There are already clear signals in the legislation regarding this, and this has taken form now, and effectively providing us with this condition that undoubtedly is going to promote greater legal safety and security for some of the auctions that will take place. The first one involving the state of Espírito Santo. And so this gives us an interesting outlook for all those that are interested in dealing with port concessions, because we know these leasing contracts, where they can migrate to after a concession. And so it's a very adequate and very positive measure, especially now with this new port legislation, new port law. Also, regarding the leasing contracts, that helps us to bid for new terminals. So greater flexibility. It doesn't have to be heavy and inflexible. And this will play in favor to customize these contracts in a simpler manner and simplified leasing possibilities. And so this is a very interesting measure in that way. Now, another issue is the non-use of a bid, or at least trying to expedite the bidding process, and that will not undermine government procurement. And so also this is a measure to try and expedite this work. We know that sometimes this is very slow. This is a very slow process, the bidding process. And so anyway, to try and be more efficient, and the quicker, the better. Also, to revamp temporary use contracts that were in the UNTAC resolutions. Because of a court ruling, these contracts have been suspended, and now it's different. Now it's part of a law. So going back exactly to what the agency has proposed, and the idea is the use of port areas for non-consolidated cargo, for the exploitation of idle areas and offshore activities as well. So a very expedited process. So it's not the port authority that will offer this, but anyone who's interested can seek the contract, seeking the port authority in order to test, quote unquote, what's best for them. And if it works, of course, if the operation is viable in a short amount of time, and so perhaps a full-time occupation through a leasing contract or even through a bid or procurement process. And this will also allow, the leasing contracts will allow that the cabotage product, BR do Mar, from the federal government will improve, allowing for structured operations with shipments of certain cargo will be more widely available. I believe that as we go back to temporary use contracts, we'll undoubtedly add more efficiency within organized ports. I say organized ports are those that their efficiency has been questioned in terms of the asymmetry of their regulation. This recently was seen in a due diligence audit report where the diagnosis was really to exploit private activities, private use contracts, cargo transportation, etc. This has been a lot more efficient in organized ports. So these measures, the idea is to mitigate, to decrease asymmetries, and to have greater efficiency in organized ports. And finally, more competency of the regulatory body for port areas. This is important because the dynamics of the market is different dynamics of the legislation. So to materialize in law this jurisdiction means that we can discipline other forms of occupation that the market is demanding. Of course, within a different type of dynamic. The port is not an end to itself. The port responds to different demands, and this has a lot to do to try and provide a quick response to society. We have an energy matrix that's being developed. So, of course, the regulatory body usually demands to develop some kind of different occupation. And this tool, this legal provision, allows for us to have greater flexibility, possibility without any questioning in the courts. So it's already in law that offers our industry legal security, regulatory stability. This is so necessary for the development of our country. And I think that, I actually want to allow for us to have a greater debate. So I'm going to stop here with my answer. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say regarding that. Yes, thank you. Wonderful. Now, let's just go on to the final remarks, conclusion, if you will, just to wrap this up. Yeah. So please feel free.
So I thank for your important contribution. So as former director of the regulator ANTAC, so you have lots of important insights to share, and will be of great importance to our port to have the vision of the regulator inside a public port. I'd like to ask Diogo to make considerations very briefly about this first round of questions. So Mayhara, we talked a lot. We talked, had a lot of important visions brought by Jesualdo, by Ted, by Murillo. All the insights everyone brought, they have been very important. I will choose some points to comment briefly, because all the themes are complex, so it's quite difficult to be brief, but I'll try hard. So I would like to thank Ted Lago for his kind words, acknowledging our secretariat. It's not it's not a work of one man, it's a team work. So, and I may say that this year, all the team, we have experienced a grown up. So I am very happy to say that I have lots of excellent workers. So Flavia, Fabio, Otto, they have been critical components of the solution for this difficult moment. But the moment that this crisis made us to be very aligned, and this alignment went beyond our secretariat. Our team, we've had lots of participations from the market, from the labor organizations, contacting these stakeholders on a daily basis. Not always simple, but we've always searched for a consensus. And talking about the port authorities, the port managers' participation, it's been fundamental. Maybe the managers faced the crisis in the front, the battlefront. And when we talked about potential problems of the labor sector, those who were in the trying to talk with the employees were these managers. So represented and well represented by Mayhara and Ted. Mario was not here with us in the beginning of the pandemic, but I think this consensus creation towards a common objective, on one hand, the continuity of the operations, on the other hand, the safety of our people, sporadic workers or public employees or private employees. So we've had a consensus to work with the less impact possible. It's not been easy. It's been tough to pass through this moment of our history, but I think we've been able to mitigate the main damages, the main losses. Well, so resuming on the Ted Lago speech about the public authority, I agree totally with you. The port and this port authority, either public, either private, we must see the bigger picture. There's a lack of trust that maybe the private manager would not have the same behavior, because it depends a lot on the design of our concession, the model of private concession. We are able to bring inputs to have some interests alignment in order to this private to have the necessary profit, necessary revenue, but also to generate development. I see the role of Lago and Mayhara. It's a very well-developed role. What generates the meeting of this demand to be in a public authority in the port, a booster of regional and local economic activities, and sometimes nationally impacting. But I ask you, it's been the regular behavior of the public authority and previous managements. It's been the normal effect generated by the previous managers, and I don't want to mention specific names, but I would like to see, to see the bigger picture. And I would say no. The ports, the public ports, they did not did not completed their roles. We have some exceptions, but as a general rule, general behavior, this role of the public ports, public authorities, they did not perform their roles properly as local developers, looking at the impact of the port to the cities. So how the port cities are, they criticize the port activity because they sometimes the citizens do not know that the port activity sometimes is the bigger employer of the city or the income generator. And the average citizens understand the port activity as a damage to the quality of life. And my question is, even considering everything has been brought, these public authorities, they have been performing their roles properly. And my second question is, may the private management with the proper contract, properly designed conception, everything monetized or access canal, how many ports were under risk to lose their accesses, to lose their operational access? This is a problem for the local economy. So if we have this brought in a competent way, we always count on the participation of everyone to to build this through a contract with clarity, with some stimuli instruments, and also penalty instruments. So that's the logic of agreements building. So I think these would be these ports would be boosters of economic activities, improve the relationship port-city. I think that's the backstage of our privatization framework. Now we'll get words from Admiral Murillo. So Admiral Murillo said we could have evolved more. Yes, always, but we tend to be pragmatic. So that's the possible, maybe for the moment. Sometimes we need to take a leap bigger than our legs. For example, temporary usage agreements. It seems to be interesting for everyone. Some people understand this as a risk with some reason. Maybe if I celebrate a contract with too many flexibility, maybe the current parties in the contract, they may feel threatened. So I pay a very expensive value for tenancy, and there is someone new opening celebrating a new contract besides me, with a price much cheaper than mine. I don't know. I'm not answering. I'm just bringing in all the controversies. And so it's a step, for example, not allowing this for consolidated cargo. So, and we may have another evolutions in the future. So our concepts are each day more flexibility. So regarding regulation, and I close my cutout of these first round of questions regarding regulation. It's been part of the speech of Admiral Murillo and Jesualdo. I don't think that so far the movements taken by the regulator are movements that generate some results regarding vulnerability of the freedom of price logic. I think we risk the next steps to be damaging to this concept. But I think the resolution number 34, it seems adequate to me, because we as a conceding power, we do not necessarily restrict the regulatory agency. I understand that we don't. So the regulatory agency brings the policies, guidelines. So the law brings the policy guidelines, and I think it's very clear in this new 14047 to freedom of price, accepting the economic abuses. So who has the competency to establish the hypothesis of economic abuse, and what's the methodology in cases of economic abuse? Is not the conceding power, and we need to respect the roles of each public party. So our institutional maturity in Brazil depends on these kind of understanding. So the regulator must regulate. So the Ministry of Infrastructure brings the policy. And what we've been brought to the regulator and interpreting and the hypothesis of acting, we've brought the vision of policy, which messages we must take to our operators, to our investors. That's the important thing. That's the key message. So departing from these messages, we'll see if we'll have or if we won't have investments. And we've been very, very sensitive to these signs. We're very optimistic that we won't have a movement of a table of prices and between us. So establishing a reference value is something that brings a temptation to establish a table of price. And we inside the agency, we've been very responsible towards this, but we have our restrictions. So we're talking about public policy. Agency talks about regulation, and the defense bodies, they talk about competitiveness defense. And our role is to bring everyone to sit on the table and to arrive into a consensus. And then we must observe the risk of economic abuse, but we may not interfere in a logic that is not only national, but is international. So the freedom of price, in the ports. So Diogo, our brilliant secretary. So if we could spend the whole day discussing these relevant subjects, and I'll take advantage of your speech, Diogo, to start our second round of questions. We are short on time. I'll do more objective questions, and please use 5 minutes to answer, okay? So Jesualdo, so getting this, talking about freedom of price, what's the perception from the market? So regarding the fair price or the freedom of competitiveness, or the table of prices, I would like to hear from you. Thank you, Mayhara. It's the speech of the Secretary is very important. So the ministry must bring in the policies, and the regulator must regulate. But the regulation, according to the sector's characteristics, that's what the market wants. So where we have prices, we don't need to talk about fair price. We maybe fairness of tariffs. In our understanding, this when we talk about the regulation that is not too that not interferes a lot. So so we have the guideline in the law that talks about freedom of price, and then to that regulator may interfere in the occurrence of an abuse, and if denounced, if we do have any claims. So and talking about this fair price and this freedom of price, and so the ministry wanted only some clarity on the way it's been written to avoid controversies. The law must be as clear as possible, so otherwise we would spend a lot of money with law firms. Now, by this sixth article, it's very clear that the guideline is to have freedom of price. If any abuse occurs, the regulator will act, but will act afterwards. And we are very worried about the methodology from the agency, methodologies that brings references of price. It would take to temptations. We've heard from the market, so the price is free but must be fair. No, this word fair is not very well applied when we talk about markets. But, and it's been very, very common concept from the director from Antaki, talking about this issue, and we have great expectations about this regulation after the law confirmation. In the past, we've had some initiatives from the regulator that try to ask us for monthly reports about our price assembling, or some attempts to impose to the private sector the same level of regulatory accounting that is demanded for the port authorities that works with the public with tariffs, but it's different from the private market. So we want these initiatives to be in the past, and we want to taste a new vision of regulation. So very necessary to have legal security and to assure the investments on the terminals already in operation and with 30 years ahead, and to incentivize the new investments. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Jesualdo, for your contribution. And there's no easy question here. Our questions are very teasing, and I think we are meeting the demands of our audience, to when we trace this parallel between the private and the public sectors. So Admiral Murillo and Diogo commented that for sure these changes in our regulations, they bring us strong benefits. We are not in a tier, in an ideal tier, but we evolved a lot. So Murillo, I would like to know if nowadays the sectorial port, the port sectorial policy is meeting the main demands of the private facilities. There are, working with the public ports inside the public facilities. How ATP sees this, are meeting or not? Well, now you want me to disagree with our Mr. Secretary, but no, they are not meeting Mayhara. And I've been talking to Mr. Secretary Diogo, Piloni, and 15 days ago, as we all participated in a forum where I've had to talk about legal security, and I thought that legal security is more perception, a sensation, and in this case, it's very similar. I discussed a lot with Mr. Secretary Diogo, and he says that I am always complaining, trying to defend what's not possible to defend, but I disagree. We have a lot to improve, and we are about to forward some suggestions of ours, from the coalition of all the entrepreneurial associations. When we try to suggest, we try to bring to the understanding of the infrastructure ministry some points that may be improved. So in the past 10.233, the law that I talked about in my previous speech, the 10.233 law has a lot of failures. It's a very generic law. It deals with authorization, concession, and tenancy and leasing. So it doesn't deal with our models. We are not models, we are a link between models. So we have the 10.233 must deal us as a port activity itself, not as it deals in a very generic way. We try to suggest improvements on this. We have some propositions to alter the 12.815 to improve the system. We acknowledge that we have a lot to improve in the public port authorities sector. We defend a lot the de-statization or privatization, because the tenancies and the landlords, however, they have different legal frameworks, but they do the same, they perform the same activity. And Jesualdo talked about the labor, the hiring processes, and sometimes, and eventually we'll have to flexibilize the hiring, mostly on the not temporary workers. So we have just in Brazil, Jesualdo worked in a company. For example, in Santos, we have the sporadic workers rules flexibilized. So Jesualdo worked in a port with this activity. So the landlord and the tenants are converging, and it's more a kind of competitiveness between them. So who attracts more cargo? It was in Santos, the private use terminal. In Santos, it's where we have the lower operation. So it breaks the paradigm that says that the public has huge advantages over the tenants, and it's not true. And I think we must create an environment for the port sector in a way that we may satisfy everyone. So, Mr. Secretary will never hear again from me about regulatory issues. It's a flag of ours, but because of all the ties we have in the system, the moment we have regulation strictly from the market, it will be nonsense to talk about it. But nowadays it's necessary. I reiterate what Jesualdo said and what I've said before. Freedom of price, it worries us. Although Mr. Secretary thinks it will not have consequences, but it will. The previous resolution before the 34, so if we remember to 2389, it only dealt with organized ports and who performed that activity of pricing, and the 2389 was the public authority, the port authority. So with the next law, that centralized a lot in the conceding power and the agency, so it passes to the port authority. And we've had all the resolutions from the Treasury, the central government. It included the private terminals inside it, and it finished our right to the freedom of price. But in the day the freedom of price is general, we won't talk about it anymore because we are feeling that we are losing our rights. The activity is ours, the risk is ours, the resources are ours, and the agency is regulating what. So how can I establish my price without taking into account the risks I am submitted to? So when you see the origin of the 14047, the provisional measure 945, it imposed to the private use terminals so the only one who paid for the maintenance, the lockdown to the vulnerable from the public system, so were the private use terminals. So the public authorities will pay for this bill as well, but we know they have public resources. But so the only one, the main ones who paid were the private use terminals, and we don't understand that to pay to afford for this make part of our risk, because it's, in our point of view, there has been a loan, and we paid. By the end, we've had some gains with the 14047, but so we've had perfectly shown that we have difference between private use terminals and the tenants. So in other situations, we understand that we must be treated differently. So when we have an equalization, for equalization in a good way, with when everyone is happy, we may not complain. But nowadays we think we must have some special differentiations. I'm sorry for the time, but I finished. Okay, thank you, Admiral. I'm sure Murillo won't be bothered by your comments. It's part of the Secretary's job to listen to the sector's demands, and I think that's what makes us to grow and to evolve the challenges that lead us to new thinking and to build a better future for our port facilities. Now, passing the floor to Ted Lago, how EMAP sees the usage, if you have any intention to use some of the new models presented by the 14047 new law. Do you foresee any usage of any of these new models? Oh, for sure, Mayhara. So the evolution of the law, I think the first important point has been already stated by Admiral Murillo. But I would like to, for the records, I would like to, in 2015, for the first time I met Admiral Murillo, I thought he was a hunter of port authorities. I thought he was like in Western movies. I thought he was about to shoot someone. But with time, I acknowledge that it's been an excellent conversation. So we all agree with the need of the evolution of this law. So we needed this evolution of the 14047. And we've had a sanitary emergence to understand that the evolution should be done now. And I think we must not stop. It's a great moment to keep up the good work and improving the evolution of this law. We've signed some temporary agreements. We have a vision of commercial trade port to bring in new markets, bring in new investments. Obviously, all these flexibilizations as a temporary contract or the dismissal, simplified dismissal, we have the GNL demanding from us, and we'll start to work on this. Previously, we depended on bidding for the thermoelectrical, but now we can attend to the local market with a small volume. But I can give an example as the cellulose. A big industry here invested almost 6 billion reais in the south of the state of Maranhão thanks to a port project. So since 2014, 2015, they are occupying a warehouse, a temporary warehouse. And now we achieved to create a berth and a terminal to the cellulose operations. So obviously, there's a project that if we had the waiving of the bidding before 2016, we would have reduced it enormously. All the delay. Our region is a region under development. We have lots of areas to agribusiness. We are industrializing our region. We have lots of commodities, and then bauxite, for example, and tailor-made projects designed for certain projects, certain cargo, like bauxite or manganese. So it will help. We have some propositions, and because we have two competitors here, we have two private use terminals in the surroundings. So we need to be more efficient and to bring more results to our state and to our region. Thank you, Ted. Thank you for the examples. I think, yes, we need models to bring this to other ports, dock companies, or delegate ports. And now, a question to Mario. As an ex and a former director of the regulator now in the dock company, how the vision of a former regulator can help in a dock company activity?
Well, regulation is always a very complex issue. There's one part that's really not just regulation, but enforcement and inspection. So regulation activities that involves enforcement and inspection, you need to have the correct perception. in terms of the activities that are taking place in a port and by the port authorities. The regulators, we always request proper service provision, but the conditions, the necessary conditions that will allow for meeting this objective. Of course, regulation activities seek always to improve the legislation so that port authorities can adopt resources, human resources, financial resources, that they be adequate to meet the needs of the port. In other words, on the one hand, the provision of infrastructure to be efficient, even if we're talking about a public port, but also the needs that public-owned companies that manage ports may also have an environment that will allow the port to have modern legislation, adequate legislation, allowing for bids and public procurement, and providing the infrastructure, enforcing and inspecting, creating a harmonious environment, because ports are a cluster, really, where you have different authorities interacting, not only officials or authorities, but you have operators, ship owners, freight forwarders, control mechanisms from the state. So it's a very complex environment with a lot of information flowing, with major flows of information, and it's always challenging. It's always complex management to deal with harmonious port activities. Not only harmony, but the efficiency as well. Because at the end of the day, that's what we all seek. And so I think this is where regulation ends up impacting, because of all of the difficulties that ports have, all of the challenges, but on the other hand, there is relentless search for adequate legislation. On the one hand, you do need to do exactly what's within your competence, but on the other hand, we also seek to provide the conditions so that officials and managers can do their job properly. So it's very important to have regulatory agencies together with the government, always trying to give autonomy to port authority and resources. I think this is what regulation does, this dialogue, if you will, with port authorities. And what we see, and what we need to make very clear here today, is that in the Bolsonaro government, many measures have been taken to help many port authorities to be more professional and more efficient, and to establish an agenda for privatization. And this has been taken forward with a lot of seriousness and discipline. And we see today very positive results in this light, be it economically or financially, but also in terms of actions taken. A port authority meets the new demands, especially the most organized ports have great managers. And this is great because we see that the model works well, be it as a public port authority or the private model, but a model that meets these challenges. Of course, you need conditions of governance and compliance and due diligence in order to have the best services available. I think in a nutshell, really, that's what I would like to say regarding the question that was asked.
Thank you, Mario, for your excellent contribution. And now I'll have my final remarks, and I'll pass the floor to each one of you. And I will have 2 minutes for your final remarks and thankings regarding this 14047 new law. Thank you, Mayhara. I'd like to, for the records, following the statistics from ANTAC, the regulator, and also from the Ministry of Economy, the ports are responsible of 95 or 97% of our foreign trade. And 100% of our exports of agribusiness or agricultural commodities, they pass through the port system. So there's no doubt the system is essential for the importance of the port system for the national sovereignty. So all the actions we may take to unlock this sector and to give this sector to freely compete with the rest of the world in order to contribute for the Brazil's costs to be adequate for the proper positioning of our products. It's a matter of national sovereignty. So the flag of ABTP, and I see from the Ministry of Agriculture, from our Secretary, we need to search economic freedom and legal security. Because only with these two features we can assure the investments, necessary investments for the sector. And for this, we need to search for all the means to achieve this. The first one is the dialogue, this wide, broadened dialogue that exists. And we must keep these dialogues and incentivize more this conversation, intersectorial conversation. A big example is these moments. This is very constructive, and I congratulate Expolog for this. Other thing, legal adjustments are necessary, some legal adjustments, to clarify even more, to avoid controversies, because we have controversy. If we have controversies, we'll have controversial decisions, and we see a lot this when we try to coalesce and we ask people what they understand from a certain article. We see different interpretations from us, from the privates, and we see with good eyes the privatization, de-estatization, mostly because of the perenniality of the management. It will make the port authority to boost and to help the private to achieve new markets. We see this around the world. So, and in Brazil, we see representatives of the Antwerpia port, for example, helping our private partners to leverage businesses. I thank you for the participation in this event. I congratulate all of you, Mr. Secretary Diogo Piloni, with his wise words. And more than words, he said, he talked about facts from the public ministry. So it's not only rhetorics. He's been talking about facts. And for this, we ask even more. We're taking other needs. We are in a very unique moment, and we are committed to Brazil to do whatever is possible. And I congratulate Admiral Murillo for his positions, very balanced positions. Our Ted Lago and Mario Povia. It's been a very enriched, it's a debate that enriches us a lot, and we are always at your disposal. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jesualdo. I pass the floor to Admiral Murillo for the final remarks. Thank you, Mayhara. So I'll congratulate Expolog before I forget to mention, but my friend Enidi and Romero, that this event was in my agenda for many years, and I'm feeling bad for not have traveled to Fortaleza. And well, this digital format is okay, but nothing replaces that in-person meetings. But thank you again for the invitation. So I will not be repetitive. I agree totally with Jesualdo, but I would like to state before finishing that we have in Brazil nowadays 36 organized ports, and we're sure that this landlord position, even a private landlord, it's not sustainable. Maybe in more than 20 organized ports, I think this model is not justifiable model from the economic and commercial point of view. So, since the destatization law allows it, we must not forget, and I keep reminding Mr. Secretary Diogo, we need to think in the possibility of total alienation of these organized ports to give sustainability conditions to many of these terminals, and also taking the central government away of maintenance. We need to think a lot about it. And when I talk to some port authorities, many of them manifested interest to make private. Make private everything, every port. They think the port of Natal would be a solution. Ilhéus, so the privatization, so the establishment of private terminals in the public ports, maybe could be very welcome in lots of ports. São Sebastião, for example. I think the best solution of this destatization process can be the alienation of assets and to transform the assets in private use terminals, and the risk is totally transferred to the private party. I would like to thank you again, the presence of all of you. Sometimes we see each other in various debates, and it's been very nice. And I thank you, Ted, Jesualdo, and Mayhara. Thank you again for this almost 2 hours, very pleasant convivence. Thank you, Admiral Murillo. Now pass the floor to Ted Lago for final remarks. Once more, I thank Expolog for this invitation. We participate for some years. This format, this digital format, I can't call it a new format. I think it came to stay. And as Admiral Murillo talked, so in this sector, we've been exchanging ideas, and Secretary Piloni, we've been meeting almost weekly, and it helped a lot. Any evolution is welcome. The particular aspect of each region, each activity must be assessed. I think all the actors must be listened to and to participate in this building of what we want to the Brazilian port sector, not all the stakeholders, not only the authorities, not only the private sector, but the workers. So they've been working for centuries. So, and we cannot neglect any model over a new one, like without discussion. So we need to think new models for all the sectors, all the stakeholders, and I think we have the proper minds to give the Brazilian port sector what our country expects of it. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you again. Thank you, Ted. I pass the floor to Mr. Mario to perform his final remarks.
Well, once again, I would like to thank the opportunity to be here with friends and colleagues. I'd like to reiterate my congratulations to Expolog, these 15 years of existence, total success, and I hope that we'll have another 15 years of total success. And, to tell all of you, ladies and gentlemen, that we're very optimistic. As I finish my participation here, I'd like to leave you with a message of optimism. I think we're on the right track. Less bureaucracy, less red tape, trying to bring in the private sector to help the government to come up with better solutions. We already see some positive results in our infrastructure. Brazil is more qualified, if you will, in terms of international ports, international infrastructure rankings. So we're only going to reap the results, positive results. So thank you very much for the invitation and congratulations to Expolog. Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay. If you need anything else, I'm here. I'm fully available. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. And now we pass to Secretary Diogo Piloni to the final remarks and the panel closing. So I'd like once again to thank for the invitation. It's a pleasure to participate of the 15th Expolog. I think it's my second participation, if I'm not mistaken. First one, I think we participated together, right, Mayhara, in 2011 or 12. But it's been very nice to be here and to congratulate Mayhara. I'd like to thank all the contributions, all the ponderations by Ted Lago, Jesualdo. So the visions of all of you, experienced managers. So managers to beating records, and Jesualdo and Admiral Murillo. And Admiral Murillo is a partner. I'm not bothered at all. And all the critics or suggestions or teasings for us are to the public managers. So critics are a matter of survival. So if we get only compliments by the end of our period, of our term, we won't get nothing. So we are basically reactive actors. We're not getting the critics from the workers. For example, you are the ones who's been receiving the critics from the labor sector and the customers and clients. Now, I would love if we had time. Admiral Murillo knows this. I don't like to be teased and not to answer, but for the sake of time, I'll take notes here and I will answer properly. And I'd like to thank again. I represent the staff, and we've been working a lot to deliver all the demands and order that will arise. But we are passionate for the sector, and thank you a lot for the opportunity. So thank you, Diogo. My final remarks, I would like to thank Expolog to have given me the opportunity to conduct this high-level debate with my colleagues. Thank the presence of Mr. Jesualdo, Admiral Murillo, Mr. Ted Lago, Mario Povia, and most of all, our Secretary Diogo Piloni, an excellent manager from the government to our ports. And I would like to thank you, and now we finalize our panel officially. Thank you very much.